Every time there is a conflict in the Middle East, we always hear a certain comment, and it goes something like this. They're just all a bunch of Arabs anyway. They've been killing each other for thousands of years. That's because they're all just savage desert people. Not our problem. They've been killing each other for millennia. And we used to hear stuff like this from people like Meir Kahane. But now we see comments like this all the time on the internet because everyone's a journalist and everyone's an expert on geopolitics. Everyone's an expert on the Middle East and the Constitution and the Bible and America. Everyone's an expert on Islam. Everyone knows the Hadith and the Quran. Everyone's an expert because of the internet, because now everyone has access to the distribution of information. And so it's very common for people to say things like this. But here's the thing. The comment is very inept and it is vacuous of any sort of knowledge of how the Middle East is and also how the Middle East is in light of Western interference in the Middle East. Because when you look at conflicts in the Middle East, you always see outside influences, be it from the United States, France, or Great Britain. But they ignore that. They just say, it's not our problem, they're killing each other, that's how they are. But they never want to talk about the fact that these conflicts are provoked, they are sparked by some sort of outside influence. We saw this also in the Balkans and how NATO was arming the KLA and instigating violence between Bosnians and Serbs. So let's look into Libya just a little bit here. Libya is a huge focus right now because you have so many Western countries involved in Libya. You have the United States, you have France, you have Italy, now you have Germany. Turkey is also involved, although Turkey is not considered the West. It's definitely west of the Middle East, and it's definitely a part of European history, given the fact that the Byzantine Empire was headquartered there. So there's so much involvement. Libya is a huge focus right now, geopolitically speaking. And what's happening in that country, right? What are these countries, these NATO countries, doing in Libya? Let's not forget that Russia is also involved as well. They are competing for resources. Now, of course, a lot of this stuff is geopolitical. Turkey wants the natural gas from Libya. At the same time, buying natural gas from Libya means that it has a lot of geopolitical influence in that country. It's the same reason why Turkey is heavily involved in Somalia. By buying a lot of products in Somalia or by building a lot of infrastructure and building up Somalia's economy, it gets Somalia to become loyal to Turkey. It's very simple. I buy your stuff, you be my ally. It's really that simple. I'm gonna buy your stuff, you're loyal to me. I build up your economy, you're loyal to me now. It really is that simple. That's how geopolitics works, for the most part. Now, you have Italy getting natural gas from Libya. You have France getting natural gas. And there's this huge competition. Russia is there also. They want oil. They want natural gas. There's this huge competition for the natural resources of Libya. And the focus on Libyan natural resources has been going on since the 1950s, when oil was first discovered. But before oil was discovered, Libya was still in the crosshairs of other countries like Italy, France, and Great Britain. Why? Because if you control Libya, then you can control access into the Suez Canal. And that was extremely important. And till this day, it's extremely important. It's why Turkey has such a focus on Egypt. It's why the United States has a focus on Egypt. It's why Russia has a focus on Egypt. Because if you can control Egypt, then you can have access to the Suez Canal. It's the same thing with Libya. during before oil was discovered there. So in the 1920s, Italy invaded Libya. Why did Italy invade Libya? Because Libya had this grandiose idea of having an Italian empire. Mussolini had this fantasy about being a Roman Caesar and reviving the Roman Empire. In the early 1900s, this was a part of the zeitgeist of the time. The zeitgeist of the time was this obsession with empire, this focus on empire. And the British wanted an empire, the French wanted an empire, the Germans wanted an empire. The British had India, and they also had Egypt, and the French had Morocco, and had Tunisia. And the Italians, they wanted a part of that. They wanted a part of that. So the Italians invaded Libya. It was very difficult, but they succeeded in the end. So they took over Libya, and eventually you had the rise of fascist Italy under Mussolini. And this is when Italian control over Libya took a very, very sinister role. You had several Italian political leaders who were ruling Libya who were very, very brutal, such as Rudolfo Graziani and Giuseppe Volpi, and these people were butchers. For example, Graziani made sure that around 100,000 Libyans were put into concentration camps, and there was a lot of damage that was done. And that damage is still, it still resonates in Libya today. The impact goes that deep. As a direct result of fascist Italy's policies in Libya, over 250,000 Libyans died. So the Libyans, they had a lot of mistrust for the West, and that mistrust still resonates in the air today, very heavily. After the Second World War, Libya wanted to become a unified country. But who resisted the idea of Libyan unification? It was the British and the French. Why did they resist? Because they both wanted a piece of the pie called Libya. Now again, this was before oil or natural gas were discovered in that country. But like I said, they both wanted a part of Libya because of that access to the Suez Canal. It was that geopolitical importance of Libya that they wanted so badly. And so the West has a habit of wanting to keep the Middle East divided. The reason for this is because as long as the Middle East is divided, it's easier to control. That's the bottom line. You see this in Syria, you see this in Libya, Iraq, just constant division. And they say, after World War I, the British and the French, they outlined the Middle East, but they outlined it in a way to keep that factionalism strong. This is at least what the historian Eugene Rogan has observed. And so, as long as the Middle East is divided, it's easier to control. And after the Second World War, there was a king who took over Libya, and he kept Libya unified. His name was King Idris. But then there was a coup in the late 60s by a guy whose name we've all heard of, Muammar Gaddafi. And Muammar Gaddafi did a bloodless coup in the late 1960s. And there is a belief that the coup was facilitated by the West because King Idris was getting a little too close to the Soviet Union, and there was a hope that Gaddafi could become an ally to the United States against the Soviet Union in the Cold War, and that idea proved to be in vain because Gaddafi wasn't so crazy about being controlled by the Americans, even though there were times of cooperation and economic partnership. At one point in time, the United States was Libya's biggest trading partner. The United States was buying most of Libya's oil. It was the biggest buyer of Libyan oil. Gaddafi nationalized the crude oil industry in Libya. At least he nationalized a lot of it, and that very much so angered the Americans. And so there were a number of attempts to overthrow Gaddafi, but those were failures. And eventually there was enough of a faction that was against Gaddafi that it became quite easy for the United States to use that anger against him and facilitate a revolution that was successful, and we saw that in 2011. And right now, there are numerous foreign powers in Libya. You have Russia, you have Turkey, Germany, the United States, you have the French, and you have the Italians. And what are they all focused on? The natural resources. And what made it so easy to just put foreign armies in Libya to take their resources? Keeping that country divided. So anytime you hear someone go off about, well, that's how those Arabs are, they're just killing each other, remember this history and look more into it. Research this history. Really look into the details of this. Look into the details of foreign influence in Middle Eastern conflicts. It goes pretty deep. Pretty deep. So anyway, hope you guys have learned something from this message. Hope you guys have enjoyed this message. You guys just heard some theology. God bless.